So here's the underneath of my 7.3 IDI. I'm going to change the clutch in it with the dual mass flywheel starting to come apart. But already got the inspection cover off right there. As you can see, it has some play in it. As that camera is not picking it up, but some of the springs are broken inside. So I'll put the camera underneath here, start it up one last time so you can hear what kind of noises it makes, and then get on to removing the gearbox. Now the noise isn't as bad if you turn it off every single time in first gear as the clutch pushed in. But that was the neutral, so you can hear the sound at its loudest. Also the U-joints in the rear drive shafts were bad as well. That's the worst one. The middle one seems okay, and the first one does have some play in it, but change those when I get to the point of putting the gearbox and everything back together. Got both the front and back drive shafts out, as well as the skid pan. Now if you have a special jack for the gearbox, just unhook the slave cylinder and just unbolt the bell housing, as well as the cross member, and just drop the gearbox down. I do not have one of those. So the floor on these comes out, just take the floor out, as well as the carpet, and just use the engine crane and lower the gearbox down from the top. I got the right side seat out, as well as the center storage bin. Now just to remove both the shift levers for the gearbox and the transfer box, and pull the carpet up, and then take the floor out, put the gearbox into neutral. It's easier to move around. The interior is disassembled as much as it needs to be. That's what the top of the gearbox looks like. And just to come in through here with the engine crane and put two straps on the gearbox and use the engine crane to lower it onto the ground. Now to unbolt all the cross members and disconnect all the wires going to the gearbox, and then start unbolting the bell housing. So everything is unbolted and removed that needs to be removed. There's a slave cylinder for the clutch hanging off. All the cross member bolts are undone. The only bolt left is one bolt on the top of the bell housing. So now just to support the transfer box, there's a jack it up some, remove this cross member, then hook up the engine crane to it, support the gearbox, and remove the one bolt on the top of the bell housing, and then lower the gearbox down. Also, to get this out, you need to remove this piece here. The bolts are quite hard to get to, so you need a swivel. Impact makes everything go really fast. These are the two bolts I'm talking about right there. Just put them in loosely so I don't lose them. So here is the gearbox removed. Now just to unbolt the pressure plate and remove the flywheel from the back of the engine. You can see how much play the dual mass flywheel has in it. It's not that bad, but recently it's gotten much worse when you change gears, especially from first to second. It clunks really badly and you can actually feel the whole truck jerking from the slop. The input shaft and the gearbox is not damaged, which is good. If it is, they make a repair kit, which is the sleeve to go over this, and then the oversized pilot bearing. Or you can just take the gearbox apart and put in a new input shaft. Here's that clutch release bearing. Very badly worn. It's actually metal flakes coming out of it, so mind you, the clutch wasn't slipping at all, it's just the flywheel that's the problem, but if I would have kept driving it even more, the clutch release bearing would have failed and you can't push the clutch in, so here is the flywheel and clutch assembly completely removed. The dual mass flywheel. See how much play is in it. Kind of hard to show, but you can see here. There's the pilot bearing. Still in fairly good condition. Kind of damaged it slightly, getting it off. It's very heavy, about 30 kilograms. What the back looks like. There's the springs. Surprisingly, only one of them is broken. I was expecting most of them to be broken, considering the noises it was making. But mind you, not only the springs were out, there's also a friction material discs, like right in here, which also wears out, which causes the play. You can see how much play it has in it. It's the standard Vallejo dual mass flywheel, the Vallejo pressure plate. Overall, in very good condition, the pressure plate, but it's time to change it anyway since it's all apart. Now, the really interesting part about all this is the clutch disc. You can see it's a solid clutch disc, no springs, because all the damper springs are in the flywheel. I'm guessing this is about halfway worn, so this would have lasted for quite some time, but the flywheel is starting to fail, and mind you, the first thing that would have failed was the clutch release bearings. It already has metal flicks coming out of it, so that would have failed and there'd be no more clutch. Now what's interesting about this is, if you go on this side right here, I don't know if the camera picks up, but right here it says flywheel side. Turn the flywheel back over. When I took this apart, the side that says flywheel side was like this, and it was facing the pressure plate. So whoever put this together last, they put in the clutch disc backwards, and as you can see on the rivets, it's about 2 millimeters worn away in most of the rivets. So that's because they've been hitting the flywheel bolts. Mind you, this must have happened a very long time ago when they just put it in, because ever since I've been driving the truck, there's no horrible grinding noises or anything coming from the flywheel or gearbox. Here are some of the flywheel bolts, as you can see, where that clutch disc has been rubbing on them, there and there. So close this, it's flying by like that. Now if we put some of the bolts back into the flywheel, there's also this disc that goes in. And put the clutch disc in the wrong way in, the way it was. Turn it some. You can actually feel it right there, grabbing onto the bolts. So now, I don't know if this is the original clutch. If it is, then it has about 225,000 miles on it. Or if they put in a new clutch and just reuse the flywheel and they put in the Jasper Reman engine into the truck, then this only would have around 120,000 miles on it, but it doesn't really matter, because the clutch disc itself looks in really good condition. But typical, whoever did this did a complete hack job of it. Put the clutch disc in the wrong way, one of the bell housing bolts was missing, and some other stuff like that. I really wanted to get the original dual mass flywheel clutch kit for this truck, but I guess nobody makes it anymore, because on all the websites you look, they used to sell them, it just says discontinued from manufacturer, so sadly I had to get a single mass flywheel, which I don't really like, but I've got a stage 2 Kevlar clutch from Phoenix Friction. Now my biggest thing about the dual mass flywheel is what I like about it is the clutch pedal is very heavy and hard to push in, so I've been reading about all the single mass flywheels, the clutch pedal is very soft, which I do not like that, so the clutch I've got, it says it comes with the original type pressure plate, so hopefully the clutch pedal will be just as hard to push in as before. Mind you, it might be a bit softer, because even if you got the exact same pressure plate, since it's brand new, the springs in it haven't worked hard, and so it'll be slightly softer to push, but so we'll see how that goes when I get it all put back together. Since the flywheel and everything is off, good time to change the rear main seal. To do this, just remove all the bolts and pull off this triangle piece. Then you can press out the rear main seal and reinstall the triangle piece. Carefully not to damage the oil pan gasket, because that does not get replaced, so just re-silicone that really well. And the kit for the rear main seal comes with the rear main seal as well as the 8 gasket for the rear triangle cover. Rear main seal is back in, as well as the back triangle engine cover. Bit of a pain to do this. The seal itself was very difficult to get onto the back of the crank, especially with the cover and it being covered in silicone. And as well, the other problem was when you take this off, the oil pan gasket goes through right here, and when you take this off, of course it's all silicone together, you rip the back of the pan gasket off, so to replace the pan gasket you have to remove the engine, which obviously I'm not going to do that, so I just made a gasket that goes all around here out of some cork gasket material and just covered it with lots of grey silicone. Hopefully it doesn't leak, but it should be okay. You can see the silicone coming out to the corners where I tightened it, which is good. Means it filled up all the cracks and everything, so it's all ready to go. Now to put on the new flywheel. Here is the new single mass flywheel. I already sold the pilot bearing for the gearbox shaft. See the big socket that fits on it nicely, and hammer. This is a 12-inch clutch. The original one was a 11-inch. There's the go back under the truck and put the flywheel on. The new flywheel is put on. All the bolts are torqued down. The instructions say torque them anywhere from 45 to 49 foot-pounds. I torqued them at 48 final torque, but before that I torqued them all to 25 and then to 48, which is the final torque. Make sure you do it in a stop pattern. Well, now to put on the clutch disc and pressure plate. Also very important before you do that is to clean the surface of the flywheel and the surface of the pressure plate where the clutch disc goes of any oil and grease, because if you don't, you can ruin the clutch disc, especially if it's a Kevlar one like I'm using. The organic ones can tolerate some oil, but the Kevlar ones can't, so mind you, it's still not good even for the organic ones, because this is covered in a slight oil from the factory to keep it from rusting, so just make sure you clean that up really well before you put on the pressure plate and clutch disc. And this ring here that goes around the bolts is from the old flywheel, which is reused. Here is the pressure plate and clutch disc. Already cleaned off the mating surfaces on the pressure plate and flywheel. It's a 12-inch stage 2 Kevlar clutch disc. And if you look in the centers, you can see how this side is flat and this side is sticking out like about half a centimeter. Now the flat side always goes towards the flywheel, so On this side here we go toward the pressure plate, so we're going like so. Now do not put it in this way, otherwise the rivets will eat themselves on the flywheel bolts. That's exactly what the previous person did, if you ever did the clutch in my truck. So it goes on like so. Here is the clutch completely assembled. The torque spec for the pressure plate bolts is 29 foot-pounds. Torque it in a stop pattern for a even torque. And got the new clutch release bearing on, as well as I lubricated the clutch fork. Now to put the gearbox back in. This is how I'm putting the gearbox back in, just the engine crane to the floor, same way I took it out. And just a big nylon strap. And just lift it up now and slide it into the back of the engine. Easier said than done. I got the gearbox back in. So I have to put in the cross member and finish bolting all the ball housing bolts in. It's holding in right now by 3 bolts. Took about 2.5 hours of fighting it to get it back in. By far the most difficult part of the whole job. But now it's just the easy stuff. Put the drive shafts on, finish bolting the gearbox in, put the interior back together. The gearbox is completely installed. Cross member and all the bolts are on, as well as all the wiring harness and things are hooked up, as well as the speedometer cable. Now to put the interior back together and then put the drive shafts in, as well as got the clutch slave cylinder back on. Put all the gearbox and everything put back together. Interior is nicely put back together as well. There's the drive shaft, all that's left is to put it in. All new U-joints. The way I removed the old ones was a big socket that fits over it, put it on the ground, then put the U-joint on the socket, take a smaller socket that fits inside and just hit it with a big sledgehammer and just pop them right out, and then just press them back in a vise, put a nut on them to get them in further when they get flush. It's been about 3 months since I put the single mast flywheel in, about 2,000 miles on it, all of which towing the trailer. Overall, I really don't like the way it drives much worse. The shift's just as bad, the gear over sound is pretty much unbearable, it's all you can hear. Mind you, the truck exhaust and everything is very loud, it has no muffler, so it's just how loud the gearbox is. It's all you can hear, so. But luckily I managed to find you manufacture a dual mast flywheel, so I'm going to take the gearbox back out eventually and change it and put the proper flywheel on. Now there are ways people say you can put extra oil into the gearbox through the top of the shift hub or use a thicker oil, but mind you, the ZF5 gearbox is meant to use automatic transmission fluid, so I'm not going to be putting any different fluid into it, because that will eventually damage the synchros. And as well as you put extra fluid in through the top, just puts extra stress and stuff on the seals, and the gearbox starts to leak. So the only proper fix for it is to take the gearbox back out and put the proper flywheel in. As well as I really don't like the way the clutch pedal feels, it's way too light. The original one was really heavy. I really liked it and had a good clutch pedal feel to it and it would grab really good. The new one is just rubbish. I'll start it up so you can hear just how loud the gearbox is. This is inside, door closed. This is the sound as the clutch pushed in. Here's the sound as the clutch released in the neutral. It's much louder in person than it is in the video. So on the video here, eventually I will take it all back apart and change the flywheel in it again. So thank you for watching.